All right, welcome everybody. Welcome to this conversation with Thomas More. We are exploring depth, soul, purpose, and also his current book, Ageless Soul, which I've just finished, so Hara is reading. And how this is going to be structured is I have a list of questions that I'm going to ask Thomas, and then we'll open it up to your questions and give you a chance to ask whatever you like. What I would like to do is if as questions start to come up, drop them into the chat room, because we may have a bunch of questions and I want to make sure that I answer wherever there's heat and kind of direct Thomas to a question or two. And we will go ahead and get started. So as many of you know, I mean, Thomas has written, was it 26 books now?
Yes.
Yeah, 26 books. He's had a few on the New York Times bestseller. Is the one that I think most of us have seen, that you find in just about every bookstore, is Care of the Soul. And his background is really unique. It includes training as a monk beginning at age 13. He also went to graduate school for music, and he's a therapist. So he comes into the soul conversation amongst other, you could talk to him about golf and soul. You could talk to him about being a dad and soul. He's one of the few people that has really taken on exploring what it means to inhabit your soul through all these different discovery practices, but also in the embodiment and the living of your purpose. Like I said, I just finished reading his book, Ageless Soul, and was not really sure what to expect. I was like, oh, this will be interesting. I am curious about the end of life and what it means to become an elder, but I found it incredibly relevant. And I'm 41, about to be 42. So Thomas, welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Brandon. I just feel good being with you. It's just great. There's something about your spirit that just makes me wake up and feel very good. So I'm happy to be with you tonight.
Wonderful. Thank you. It's really an honor. There aren't that many folks who have taken on what you've taken on for so long, and it's a true privilege and pleasure to be here. So this is kind of a purpose or soul 101 question, but I think it's a good place to start, and that's, why should someone live their soul's purpose?
It's hard to answer because it's almost self-evident. I guess I would say the first thing I would want to say is that there's a difference between your conscious purpose and your soul purpose. That's a very different thing. It's like you spend your life trying to discover what your soul's desire is. See, I feel a little more comfortable with the word desire. I think that the soul, purpose is a spirit word. Desire is a soul word. You know what I mean? These are two different things, soul and spirit. And they're both equally valid and good. But if you're going to speak about soul, I like soul language. So I would probably more talk, Jim Hillman was my good friend and was so brilliant about all these things. He always used to say, ask the question, what does your soul want? Want. What do you feel the yearning, the longing? One of the first essays he ever wrote was about pothos, which is the word for longing. And he wrote this long, interesting piece about longing. So that's where I go with this idea. I say, what do we long for? Not consciously, but deep, deep, deep down in us. So we only kind of glimpse, we just get a hint of what that deep, deep yearning is for our lives and what we want to be. It's not what I want. It's not what I choose. It's not what I think is good. It's not what I think will be successful. It's what is this deep, deep yearning? What is this longing deep in my heart and soul for life, for connection, for experience, for people, for work, for creativity, all these things. So if the answer to your question then for me would be more like, you have this longing in you, so don't you want it fulfilled in some way, at least partially? That's what it's all about.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, that resonates, that there's like a, that like a deeper desire than whatever we've been conditioned to want or something like that. And that's a much more interesting place to live and to fulfill
That puts us in the realm of Eros as opposed to Logos. Not that these are not compatible. They're totally compatible. But I think when you're talking about the soul, if you want to stay close to the soul, you have to stay close to the erotic of your life, the Eros in your life. That's what moves you. And that's the language you have to have. It's all about what you love and what you don't even know what you love, but it's deep in you. And you have to look and say, what does my soul love and what does it want to be around and with?
Thank you. So my next question for you is, how is the soul conversation different in the last third of life?
Well, I have, forgive me for redefining everything, but I don't know what that means, really. I don't know, because this is what I was exploring in Ageless Soul, is that I didn't want to write about, as Jungians do, the last half of life. That's usually what I hear, the half. Because those fractions don't mean anything to me. We are living our lives and they're divided into like these micro moments and all kinds of divisions. So I don't know what the third means. I guess as we move toward an older period in age, it might, I'm sure certain things change. But what I'm impressed by is how we don't change. That's what ageless means to me. We don't change. We remain the same person we've always been. Or we act out. We are living the persona that we had at other ages. Like you're in your 40s. I am also in my 40s. My calendar says, my birth date says 77. But I'm in my 40s many, many times, probably at least several times a day. I'm 40. That's in me. That's my soul age. That's the multiple. I'm all the ages I've ever been. And I don't mean all the years. I mean all the minutes. All those minutes. So I could tell you about I'd say about that question. What is the soul like in the last 450 seconds of your life? We are very complex, and we don't live in a linear fashion. Our years are always with us, so we are always all those years. So I don't know what to say. I do know that I'm at my father. My father died at 100, and I think he was most of his life, especially in his 90s, he was really 50, in his 50s. He was living his 50s at 90. So I don't know. I don't know what to say.
Well, you had said something in the event that I attended in Sebastopol, and you expounded on it. I'm forgetting which chapter in your book, but you were like, you West Coast people, you've got a fascination with the present. Like
yes,
like be present, be here now. And
it's not me.
I've got it written down. It's like, that's the last place I want to be.
It is.
And so you wrote this whole chapter about like how to inhabit really the entire dimension of time, like be connected obviously to a legacy, but also to, the different incarnations of purpose or of soul's identity, if you will, and having access to that. And kind of moving, as you said, like, I think you said in a polytropic way in between your 6-year-old self and 40-year-old self, and
Yes.
I thought that was really beautiful. Is there anything else you'd like to say about that kind of loose relationship to?
I'd love to say more about not living in the present.
Yeah, please.
Because I think I think people are being duped by that idea. I don't think it's a good one. I think the point is that the soul is primarily multiple in so many ways. It's multiple in time. It's multiple in personality. So we are many personalities. We are many ages. We have many characters. We're not just one set of character traits. We're many different characters. Variety and multiplicity is this. Now, Hillman used the term polytheism, which is a complicated one. I mean, I can work my head around it. I had no trouble with that, but I think I can understand that people would have, it doesn't immediately tell them what he's trying to say. So we have to understand, I think, that all this multiplicity is going on. So to be in the moment to me, is very, very limiting, because I want to be in so many moments. I don't want to be in this moment very much. If I have to be, I will, but I don't want to get stuck in this moment. I want to be in the past. I want to really enjoy the past. I want to be in my own personal past. And I want to be, I feel that I'm very much at home in the 15th century. And I find that, without being conscious about it, I'll be in a museum and I'll be drawing, I'll walk, and I find my feet moving toward this painting, and I look at it, and most of the time it will say 15th century. That's when it was painted. That's my century. That's where I live. I don't like the 16th very much, and the 14th doesn't interest me too much, but the 15th really gets a hold of me. Time after time, in music and painting and philosophy and so much. So I obviously have a life there. When I go to Italy, I go to 15th century Italy. I don't see the modern Italy very much. I just see the 15th century, and I go to those places. And I'm there, and I realize that's where I am. I'm home. I just look past all those other centuries. So that's, to me, a very interesting thing about living in another time, the past. And in this book, Ageless Soul, I talk about the pleasures of living in the future, of thinking about the people coming after me and wanting to give them something, prepare them for something, start their education before they're born.
Yeah, I think you had a whole chapter on legacy as like a way to inhabit elderhood, as like,
that's right,
like living for like all the ripple effects of your contribution, mentorship, whatever your expression of that is. I like that a lot. That I think that word is going to resonate and translate with many more people than the word soul or purpose will, because I think a lot of people can kind of get a sense of like the impact of their actions, in a sense.
Yeah.
So I have another question for you, and this one is really intriguing to me. So in your book, it was early in the book, I'm not sure what page number or chapter, but you said there is a dark side to everything. You have to allow some shadow to accompany any manifestation of soul. And then I think later you said something to the effect of like, uninterrupted happiness is a mood disorder or something like that. I was wondering if you might expand on kind of how to allow shadow into a soulful life.
Yeah, I don't think this is easy. If people sometimes talk about shadow as though this is just a simple matter, you just learn the theory and you apply it. I don't think it's that easy, because it's a challenge, a real challenge. And you have to recognize that anything you do, as you just said, that anything that is very positive is going to have a shadow, no matter what. That means that it's going to have a side to it, an aspect of it, that is not as positive and as hopeful and satisfying as you would want it to be. It isn't. It's not. You can't clean it up saying, oh, I can integrate my shadow. That's a phrase I really don't like. Integrate your shadow. You can't integrate your shadow. You don't meet the devil on the road and integrate him. You know, that's not what you do. That's so psychological in such an egotistical way. You don't integrate your shadow. You come to grips with it. You meet, you encounter the shadow, and you struggle with your whole life, maybe. And it shatters your view of the world, and it shadows your sense of yourself and your dignity and your your good intentions and everything. It challenges everything to meet the shadow side. So you don't integrate it. What you do is you spend a lifetime struggling to try to somehow, you have to acknowledge it, but you do something, you treat it as a companion maybe, but not, you don't integrate it.
Mm-hmm. Thomas, I want to put you on the spot a little bit and ask you, when was a recent time where you had to wrestle with your shadow, and what was that experience like?
Well, a recent time would have to be today because it happens every day. I think today the thing that came to me about my shadow was, I did think, as I say, every day you deal with it. So today it had to do with the fact that as you know, I've just come back from Florida where I spoke at, I think it was 6 different places, mainly churches, but it was sponsored by bookstores for the most part, the talks that I gave. And I spoke at one bookstore in Miami. And what I find there is so much overwhelming welcome and warmth. And I mean, I just felt so accepted. I've been, I come to this church, I know nothing about the tradition of this church. And they put me in the pulpit to speak. And, I won't go into that story, but I have this story where I tried to be a Catholic priest and I left it. And ever since, I've been speaking from pulpits. I mean, once I gave up the priesthood, I ended up doing nothing but. So, but what I find is that there is so much, I get, people put me on a pedestal in some ways because I'm talking about the soul. And there's a big shadow to that, a huge shadow to that. So I also get letters that are very, 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 very dark, critical, very dark and critical. Very holy religious people just cuss at me like crazy, because I'm not a believer or I don't follow I don't use the right language. I get it even from Jungian sometimes, because I know Jung quite well. And so I teach at Jung centers and they write me these scathing letters because I don't use Jung's language in a pure way, things like that. So I get torn down constantly for one reason or another. People misread me. They tell me about this book, Ageless Soul, they say that I'm full of ego, I'm full of myself because I use stories from my own life. From my experience is I want to write something where I'm not using someone else's story because I don't know those people really deeply, but I know myself quite well. And so I can write a story about myself, but that's interpreted as being full of ego, So there's a shadow to that. And I published, as you mentioned, I published this book of short stories on golf, which I really thought would be the most benign thing I've ever published. And someone wrote to me to say that I was just trying to make money on the popularity of golf, and I didn't know what I was talking about. You know what I mean? There's that side. So going out to the world is wonderful. I get a lot of feedback that helps me, that inspires me to keep going. but there's a huge shadow to it. And it's just enough to cripple you, you know, it just takes you right down. Maybe these examples don't really say it, but the constant shadow aspect of that acceptance is quite powerful.
Yeah. It almost sounds like what you're sharing is that, like, by, you know, taking a stand and you know, sharing your work and advocating for a more soulful approach to life, that you got a target on your back. You're being protected,
Exactly,
religious, by the Jungian, and that
yes,
some of that, you know, gets past your defenses, and it seems like it triggers something, some kind of, you know, darker mood or old.
I'm vulnerable to it, yes.
Yeah. Wow. So another question here for you. Can you share an example of someone whose path to their life's work, their opus, and, you know, whose examples are most worth studying in terms of people who have taken on being fully, you know, soulfully expressed, and yeah, like who can we point to? Who can we study to say, like, oh, this is a good example to look at?
Of a person who has lived this soulful life, this life that I'm trying to describe.
Yeah.
It's difficult because nobody does it perfectly, obviously. And also, soul tends to be, it's interesting about the soul is that it thrives, it develops, it expands, if that's the word, deepens, becomes more present through loss, failure, mistake. So we're not looking at people who have achieved a lot sometimes, or that who have been so great. You know, we're looking at people who have real problems. I'll give you one example pops into my head. When I start to write a book, when I'm writing the first sentence of a new book, I do two things. I read Hemingway and I play Bach. That's what I do when I start. I want that inspiration. I don't think anyone has written more beautiful sentences than Ernest Hemingway. Mm-hmm. And nobody has worked through the musical issues and problems that come up in composing as Bach has. Nobody. So I do those two. Now, Hemingway has been really criticized for being a macho, you know, kind of a dirty, rotten character, you know, in many ways. So, you know, but he's my hero for the sentence, for writing a good sentence. I don't care what he did, he wrote really good sentences. And it really, I mean, if he really did, you know, if he was a murderer, it'd be harder, maybe. Yeah. Although, you know, we have composers who have been murderers. Gesualdo, for example. But if he was really a dirty, rotten character, totally, if I felt about him that way, I probably wouldn't be drawn to his sentences. But he has a life full of shadow, and ignorance, and caught in the complexes of his time and all of that. So I don't say he's a soulful model at all, but he's a model for writing good sentences. Mm. So I have to take him with his shadow. I have to enter that shadow. Yeah. And, you know, speak for him. There are many people like that. My friend Hillman, you know, many people hated him. He was very close to me, and I spent a lot of time with him. I hung out with him. I mean, we just would go out in the evenings together a lot, just the two of us. And I lost some friends because of it, because they didn't like him. He was not an easy person to be around. One time he and I gave a workshop together in Evanston, Illinois. And it was really difficult because he was so challenging to people. I coddle people. I really take care of an audience. You know, I treat them like they're in a nursery. And he treats them like they're in a bullfight. You know, they're the bull. So the two of us were doing this together. Now, Hillman was really one of the most brilliant people, maybe the most brilliant person I've ever met. And yet he was full of shadow. And I had to be his friend, I had to enter into that. Both of those realms, I had to be in the realm of his shadow and in the realm of his brilliance, both. Mm. I would suggest he was one of my models in some ways, but I wouldn't want to be like him generally. But there were some things, a lot of things he did that would model this soulful life.
Yeah, and I'm also kind of hearing a parallel here earlier when you were talking about, you know, welcoming the shadow in, because it, you know, I'm a human, I've got my shadows, I've got friends and family who've got theirs, and like hearing you say like to welcome it in, and also to see like how you hold Hemingway and Hillman, that actually like it provides me like a measure of release. Like I don't need to hold people, especially in our profession of like soul discovery, soul embodiment, to this unrealistic like perfect, like shadow aware, omnipresent kind of level. And yeah, I remember like reading that chapter and just feeling like I could let down my, you know, my warrior stand, that we are like like fully, you know, doing shadow work and like, you know, all that, because I can just accept the brilliance and also accept the shadow, and just that's it. You know, it's, I don't got to do anything else with it.
No, you can't explain it away. You can't defend it, and you can't make it look good.
Yeah. Great.
And you can't integrate it.
Well, so speaking of the integration and making it look good, you know, I'd ask you a question in Sebastopol about embodying purpose or embodying soul, and you had said sense of humor and being polytropic. And
yeah.
I'm in a conversation with a few people in this room about, you know, what it means to embody soul and purpose, and I'm curious, like, what are, I mean, should we even try to embody our soul's purpose? And if so, like, what's effective? Like, what works? Like, how do you inhabit your soul's purpose, and like what challenges you run up against in doing that?
Well, I think the key is that the soul is not led by the mind, for one thing. Yeah. So you can't think this through. Mm-hmm. You can't say, okay, I want to stay close to my purpose. When you describe that, it sounds a bit mental to me, like, you know, intellectual. The soul is really something else. It's about desire and pleasure. So if you want to know what your purpose is, I think you have to ask, what gives you the most pleasure? Not what gives you superficial entertainments, or what coddles you or prevents you from facing life. Those are not real pleasures. But what gives you deep pleasure? What is it? That, you know, if you can find that, it's like when someone tries to find out what they should do in their life, what work they should do. I think you have to really look and see what gives you the most deep pleasure, and can you discern the difference between pleasure and satisfaction, or pleasure and happiness, or pleasure and ego strokes, you know, that kind of thing. Can you distinguish all that? So deep pleasure is a function of soul. It's very, very deep. You have to learn what that feels like. Yeah, so you can see it when it happens. And if you can see it when it happens, then you have a guide toward what you should be doing, what you could be doing. Mm-hmm. So you see, again, it goes back. Hillman wrote about this in his book, The Myth of Analysis. He wrote about the story of Eros and Psyche. And I've written many times about how I discovered Eros and Psyche in Rome. Can I tell that story briefly? Please. So I was in Rome, and I was going through the Museo Capitolino, which is the big museum in the center of Rome. And there's this big, huge marble walk and big room, huge room. I mean, you could hardly see to the end of it. It seemed it was so long. I mean, I'm probably exaggerating it over time now, but I was in this room and I saw this sculpture at the end of it. And I thought, what is that? And I just, like, some things attract you. You don't know why. So I start walking toward it. And I finally got there, and it was Eros and Psyche. It was a sculpture of Eros and Psyche as young people, maybe adolescents. And they're embracing each other and just about to kiss. And they're maybe 5 feet tall, the sculpture made out of marble. And I stood there and I thought, whoa, this is really something. I mean, I saw this before I even knew what it was. I was drawn toward it. I walked toward that among all the other things here. I went right to it, walked a long way, and here I find Eros and Psyche, love and the soul, kissing each other. I mean, my gosh. Well, that's the lesson of my life. So what we're talking about here is how Eros is really the companion of soul, not Logos. As wonderful and as magnificent as Logos is, it's not the companion, not the lover of soul, where the two are together. So you follow Eros, and you have to learn how to find Eros, know what it feels like, distinguish it from other things that look like Eros, and use that as your guide for your soul life.
I like that. I was recently in an interview with, or in a call series with Jean Houston, and she mentioned something very similar, that like mythology really is the access. Like you find the archetype that, you know, works for you in that moment, and to where you can inhabit a deeper sense of place and connection, whether that's Eros or, you know, another archetype or you know, myth that you're working with. But she really found that like myth was a powerful way for her to discover and inhabit her soul.
Well, I want to be sure you understand me here. I'm not talking about the myth of Eros.
Okay.
I'm talking about the experience of Eros.
Okay.
I'm not saying I was aware of this figure from myth in that room. I was aware of the erotic in the world, in life, in myself. That was not a statue coming out of myth expressing a mythology. That was a statue that made present this love between my soul and my desire.
Okay.
You see what I mean? It was very immediate.
Yeah. Great. So I have one last question for you, and I'm going to turn it over to the group here. So any questions you have that you want to ask Thomas, feel free to drop them into the chat, and we'll surface them one by one. So Thomas, my question for you is like, what makes this time unique from the perspective of, you know, having a soulful culture or a soulful inhabitation of the human presence on this planet? Like, why is this time any different? I mean, because we've been, like, as you know, this conversation is as old as humanity probably. Like, what is unique about our treatment of soul in 2018?
I really don't know much that's unique about it. I don't know if there is anything unique. If you know history at all, you know we've been through so much over the centuries in our Western culture. Who knows about the other parts of the world? You know, they've been through theirs as well. Today it's one globe, but for a long time it wasn't. So I don't think there's much different, really. We are going through the same issues, the same battles. People sometimes say, what a terrible time we're in now, but I was inspired so much by the Florentines of the 15th century. Now, when they were making all their paintings and writing their philosophy and poetry and all of that, music, incredible music of that time, they were in battles constantly. And like Florence, where a lot of this art happened, was threatened by Venice. The Sforzas in Venice and the Medicis in Florence were, you know, fighting each other. There were one time Lorenzo de' Medici had to come make an escape, sort of by sea on a boat, to get away from problems. His brother, I know one of his relatives, I forget which one, was killed, murdered in the cathedral. I mean, imagine that being, you know, that's equivalent today would be the murder of some major figure in our society. So the Pope sent his army against Florence. I mean, you know, imagine today if the Pope was sending out his fighter planes against us, that would be quite a shock. So I don't think it's so different. It's just that we do have the capacity maybe to destroy everything. That's certainly a factor, but for a lot of people, it was always the end of the world if something tragic happened. I think that's the case for us. So archetypally, you might say it's the same always. We've always been in this position. And interestingly, these times have been the most creative. A lot has come out of these difficult, painful, uncertain times. That's when artists have sort of been stimulated. They wake up and they do something. I think that this time we are in now, I'm particularly concerned about American history because so much of what we built over the past 200 years is being destroyed day by day. And by ignorance, by stupidity. You know, it's hard to imagine we have so much stupidity today ruling us. And so that's horrible. But on the other hand, it's an opportunity for us to regroup because we've needed it. We need a deep renewal. We've been sloughing off. We've been in an entropy for a long time. With all this technological development, that technological development is not any indication of the advance of a culture. Mm-hmm. None whatsoever. Those are tools and instruments that can help us, but essentially as a culture, we haven't improved. We've been in an entropy. We've been declining. So we need a down period. We need some shock to our system to recover our essential values and see if we can, you know, have a renaissance of our own.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hold that perspective as well. I think Bill Plotkin talks about that quite a bit, as does Michael Meade, that like we need these chaotic circumstances to both invoke our own heartbreak and call and like what's really real and important and, you know, it's going to satisfy our longing, but that there's potentially a large collective, you know, purpose or soul or expression that these times can reveal as well.
Yes.
So, Thomas, I want to turn it over to the group, and there's a number of questions that have entered in the chat. And Susan, if you're with us, I want to give you an opportunity to ask your question about. Susan, can you hear me?
I can. Yeah. I felt that you kind of asked it. Let's see. Maybe about the question about trauma. Yeah, you asked the first part of it. Yeah. Hi, and thank you for being with us tonight. It's so wonderful to meet you in person. I have a particular in my purpose guiding women that are coming that have experienced deep trauma in this lifetime. And so I'm just very curious about your wisdom and insight from a soul perspective about the trauma, specifically on the feminine at this time, and how I can better, you know, guide, because it really does serve to, I don't know if to mask, to interfere, but to distract or invoke a kind of forgetting from their soul's purpose. So, curious. Thank you.
Oh, well, it's one of the great issues of our time. Certainly, the relation of the culture generally to women and feminine in a larger sense. We've identified with a masculine kind of control and values. And I mean, I think it's true. A lot of people have said this, especially Jungians might say it, that the women have carried the soul. They've embodied soul for the culture so much in so many ways. And there's something that's often forgotten about soul is that it has so much power. It's such a powerful thing. There's so much power in soul. If you are a soulful person, you are a powerful, powerful person. There's a great deal of power in it. It doesn't look like power because we equate power with force. We think that power means force and domination. It doesn't. Power is something else. Force and domination are symptoms of power. They're symptomatic expressions of power. I've written about this, I can't remember which book, but about violence. The word violence comes from the Roman word vis, V-I-S, which means the life force. The Romans used the word vis to mean what makes a tree grow and what makes grass grow, the force of grass breaking through the ground, coming up into the sunlight. That's vis. That's the source of our word violence. So I would say violence and power, domination rather, are symptomatic. By symptomatic, I mean they are crazy. They're neurotic. They're neurotic expressions of what is needed. The real thing is power. And the soul has all that power. So men's tendency to be forceful is not power. It's an expression of powerlessness. You see what I mean? It's symptomatic. It's not the real thing. It's a symptom of what is needed and is not present. Demonstrations of force are betrayals that there is no power present. There's weakness, tremendous weakness. So we have to understand this, I think. It's a sadomasochistic issue. I've written about this in a book of mine that few people get a hold of. It's called Dark Eros, which is about sadomasochism. And I think that's where we are there. Men are acting sadomasochistically toward women out of their weakness. And we have to understand that, how weak that is. What are they afraid of? There's great fear in that, in weakness. So we have to explore that way. And if all you do is try to regain the power that men have, what you're doing is trying to be neurotic the way they are. That doesn't work. So we have to women have to trust their power. Men who are not caught in that symptomatic force have to trust their power. And more men, I think, have to discover their real power as a way of getting beyond. Once they have the power, there's no need to abuse women. They don't have to purchase their strength by abusing women. That's how they do it. They abuse women and therefore they feel strong. But they don't really have power then. But it gives them the feeling which allows, some sort of, I don't know what, satisfaction, given their tremendous symptom of weakness. I mean, I can go, I talk for an hour about this, so I'll stop there.
Susan, did you get what you needed, or did you have, you want to follow up on that?
Yeah, it's helpful. I so appreciate that perspective, and it also brings up a question: is how do we get from here to there? Is a question I have. Is how.
Okay, the first thing you don't try to be like men.
Right, I hear that. That's awesome.
Okay, the second thing is, don't misunderstand the problem. You're not fighting strength, you're fighting weakness. If you know that, you have a better chance of coming up with a strategy that might help, no matter what situation you're in. You have to understand that it's very, very dangerous. That this weakness, the weaker a person is, the more violent they can be. That's the sadomasochistic emotional economy. That's how it works. So what you want to do is, I think, is not try to make a person, if you're dealing with some powerful, some forceful man, you don't want to make them feel even worse that way, because it's not going to help matter, it's going to make it worse. You try to help men have more power of a real nature, not forceful, but of a real nature. That's what we need. So, I've had men recently in the past few months approach me and say, would you lead a men's group of some kind? I'm very hesitant to enter that symptom. I don't know if I can handle it. But if I were to do that, I would try to empower men. which sounds like it's crazy because they're too empowered, but they're not. They're not. I would try to empower them in a deep way. That's what it would mean to bring soul, because soul is very powerful. Women have it. They embody it right now. Not all women, but a great number of women have that power, but they don't realize they have it, maybe. But they have more power than they think, and men are afraid of them. You have to understand that. Men are afraid of women. And the more violent and forceful a man is, the more afraid he is of women.
Thank you, Thomas. I want to move to another question here. This is from Zohara. You want to ask your question about soul and youth?
Yeah, thank you. I'm just fascinated by the last statement you said about women and power and men. That's beautiful. Thank you. And talking about children, because again, society who does not deal properly with women does the same with children and elders. So my question about soul and children, working with children, parents, and teachers, in this triangle, I find myself wanting to do the same kind of work that indigenous elders do when a child is born and they look at the child and they can almost find the soul desire of the child and help him become who he is. I don't have these skills, even though I'm trying to develop some of them, but looking at a child and at least not ruining what is there. Do you feel it's important to wait until a child becomes an adult and realizes, has more tools, or do we have a way of helping children living from their soul, from their desire?
Oh, from day one.
Okay.
Totally, completely, because the child, I'm a Platonist at heart, and I believe that, my sense, I hate the word belief, my guess, my thought is that children come into the world complete. I don't think we come in empty. I think we come complete. And we unfold. We unfold as we go through our lives. So we need that protection of that person we are at the beginning. We are not empty to be taught, to be made into a person by our parents or anybody else. We are complete. The parent job is to create an environment in which that child can unfold, can manifest what is there from the beginning. And it's got to start at day one. It's got to start there in the environment. And it starts with parents, not teaching. This is not at all about learning. We talk about learning so much. It's not about learning. Soul doesn't develop through learning. Soul develops by presence, by vision, by seeing. The child sees how parents are living, and they become that. They don't learn. It's not they're learning things. They are becoming all the time. And the environment has everything to do about whether they will unfold. So I think we need to start at the very beginning. And parents need to understand that you don't make children into who you are. That's one of the biggest mistakes. That child is an individual that's come into this world from the stars, not from you. They've come from the stars. They are not you at all. You are there. You have the great opportunity to be present to the unfolding of this being that has appeared from the stars. And it is not to be a person like you at all. The more different from you that child is, the better. So you treat that child as someone from another place, and you give that child every opportunity from the very beginning in the smallest things to pursue his or her own way of being. Mm. And so at least that's how I would do it. I would start day one.
Thank you for confirming, Thomas. Thank you.
Great. So I think we have time for one more question. And David, you actually have a double header here around soul and spirit and soul in the church. You want to speak it?
Sure. And I'm grateful. What I was interested in, one is, could you just briefly describe what you see the difference between soul and spirit?
I can give you a kind of my standard response to that. It's a big question that always comes up. It's a little more complicated if we were to sit around for a few hours and talk about it. It gets more complicated, but let me give you kind of the basics. So generally speaking, spirit is that element in us that wants to go beyond where we are,
right,
to transcend. That can happen in a religious sense or spiritual sense, and that we might want to meditate or, are you with me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. You want to meditate or pray or go on a retreat. They're different, you can do it in a religious way to go to the spirit. You get away from where you are. You get away from your body, get away from your home and your family. When I was a kid, I left my family at 13 for a spiritual reason, to become a priest. And the spirit is usually symbolized in things like steeples. And, you look at the steeple if you want to know what spirit is and meditate on it. See that it points upward and goes toward a vanishing point where you get away from the physical world. That's not a bad thing. I don't want to say that any of this is negative. It's all very positive. There's an element in us that needs that detachment and departure from body and from our family and from, it's very important to be able to do that, separate from your family. On the other hand, soul is very different because soul is almost the opposite, because soul is the image for soul is usually downward and deep. And so instead of that steeple, we get images of being at home. A house would be a good image, a home, a living room, a fireplace, image of soul. So being together with your family and in your hometown and with your animals or pets, eating the food you love and it has memory attached to it. Memory is very important for the soul. The past is important for the soul, whereas the future tends to be the focus of the spirit. Okay. We're worried about afterlife and the spirit, but the soul could care less. We're interested in where we are right now or the past.
Right.
And psychotherapy is largely about the past, to what happened and, how that happens to affect the present. So spirit likes detachment because if you're detached, you're free to explore and create. It's very, very important. But soul likes attachment. And from the soul point of view, attachment is a great virtue. So, the values that I speak of since I speak so often of soul, often are the opposite of the ones that spiritual teachers advocate.
Right.
So I do not advocate detachment in my work usually. It's not that I don't see the value of it, but I'm trying to speak for the deeper soul.
Right.
And those attachments are so valuable. To be attached to your home, to find it difficult to leave home is a great thing for the soul. It's a great experience of the soul.
Uh-huh.
If you can just go away from home and not think about it, maybe you need some more soul work, because that's a great thing to be so attached. Yeah. And so the values are pretty much different. And yet at the same time, it's a little bit like Eros and Psyche. Soul and spirit are like a marriage. They need to be together. They're so different, but they need to be together. One is not better than the other. One is not more important than the other. They're absolutely both required.
Yeah. My other question briefly is also, part of my profound awareness is how much within churches there's a lack of soul. And I just wonder if you have any thoughts about how to address that.
Churches, did you say?
Yes. The churches by and large just seem to be superficial. They don't seem to be about depth. They lack intimacy. They lack community.
Yeah. One of the big areas where you see this is that soul, too, I forgot to mention this, soul expresses itself mainly poetically with images, like art images or stories. Like telling your story is a very soulful thing to do rather than to explain yourself and explain anything. That's a more spirit thing, more abstract. So the churches tend to want to explain things, at least in my experience of them. They like to explain things rather than tell the story alone, although they do tell stories well. Telling the gospel story, if that's what a church is doing, or if it's another kind of community telling other stories, the stories of the Buddha and so on, those are very important, those stories, as stories. They don't need to be explained. I would prefer to see someone in a church stand up and tell the story and tell it really well and then sit down rather than explain what they've just said.
Right, yeah.
That takes it to another place. You get out of the soul there. So food, I discovered, food is very important to the soul. Now, I think many churches know that, and they often have dinners and things like that. Well, food could be done even more, I think. Dining, not just presenting food, but really having good food. Imagine, I would think that churches would be much more effective if they got some good chefs to cook the food that they serve to their people.
Right.
Rather than just go through the motions of having a tasteless food, you know, the real unimaginative food, to really make something of it, because that's a very soulful thing.
Yeah.
There's so many parts of life that are soulful that we could emphasize. And you don't have to be a genius. You just have to think about it and say, oh, that's really important. How could I tell this story where people would just be captivated? You know, how can I do that? How can I present it in a way that really would do it? What if we had more poetry, more poetic talk rather than all this theological talk? You know, what if we could do that? That would be bringing more soul.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Helpful, very helpful.
We could talk about that for several hours.
I agree.
So we're running up against the end of the hour here, and I want to give you all some resources to kind of explore Thomas's work more. Obviously, I encourage you to buy his books. Ageless Soul is a gem, and I now that you say Hemingway, I can see his influence in there, because you're very I don't know, like economical with your sentence structure, which is great. And Thomas, where else can they learn about your work, and what's a good entry point for them to be a part of your broader community and to be a part of events and future works?
Can I broaden your question a little bit, just a little bit, about educating yourself in this approach, to be able to go at it? I'm not bragging, I'm just telling you that I have really worked hard at this all my life. I mean, I've done a lot of work. There's a lot of spade work going on here. I have read Jung's collected work several times, I mean, page by page. I recommend that to you. That's 18 volumes of very complex material: philosophy, alchemy, mythology. I've, read Campbell's works, all of them, many times. Hillman is not easy. You should read every word Hillman has ever written. He is brilliant and an astonishing presence to us, what he gave us. He doesn't give us ideas and information. He opens up windows you've never opened before. You've never experienced before. So that's behind me, and of course my music has an impact on it, and spiritual practice for years and years. So I would say, if you want to know nowadays what's going on with me, to consult my website, thomasmoresoul.com. I can't give a lot of time to it because I'm doing so many other things, but I try. And as Brandon said, there are 26 books out there. You pick and choose, but find something there that appeals to you, and just, read a paragraph here and there sometime. I think that's the way to do it. And other than that, I'm hoping to, in the future, in the next few months now, and with Brandon's help, to do more online work where I can not have to travel so much. I'm 77 now. I don't feel like traveling like I used to. And I'd like to do more online work of this kind.
Great. Well, as we learn about these next offerings, I'll make sure we get the word out to our different purpose communities. Thomas, I want to thank you for spending your time with us and for fielding all these questions from various domains and phases of life. It's really been a joy. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Can I still say something?
Please.
It's a tradition among the Platonists over centuries and centuries to meet in an evening and talk about the soul with a small group of people. It's what's called the Platonic Academy. Every time we meet to talk about the soul, Plato's Academy is revived, and that's what we've done tonight.
Beautiful. Thank you. Good to be a part of that tradition. All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you.
Thank
Thomas.
you.
Thank you, Brandon. Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Yeah, thank you.
So much.